This Warden's Watch is our typical memorial podcast that we do during Police Week in May. So this podcast is going to be about Florida Fish and Wildlife Officer Julian Keene. And unfortunately, this is one of the more recent in the line of duty deaths that conservation officers, fish and wildlife officers, game wardens have had in the recent times for sure. So I think when we talk about the more recent ones, it really affects us all because I think we can all reflect back. I did posts on Julian in my social media when it happened, and now reflecting back, so it really affects us, the closeness to it, the connection to it. I'm sure the Florida Fish and Wildlife officers have a serious connection to this, and it hits home. And Police Week hits home anyways. And I think about the week we've had in law enforcement where we've lost, four officers just in the last week with the marshals. And it's tough when you're in law enforcement and you lose brothers and sisters. And Julian, was a game warden. He was one of ours, and I think that, affects game wardens a little more, even though our brothers and sisters in blue and green and every other color are part of us as well. But, Julian did the same job we did, and we're going to hear about his beginnings and the whole process he went through. Also, his in the line of duty death, and we have the honor of having Pam Steelman, former Florida Fish and Game officer, and really close friend of Julian's, mentor. Probably, Pam, is that close to say?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I was a mentor of his, and I had the privilege of supervising him also.
Wow. I'm just glad you said mentor and supervisor because that's what a supervisor should be, Pam. And I know the guys that I supervised are probably just like your kids.
Right. They
Right.
are. They are. You feel like it, and you're a big family.
Yes. Yeah. And I never lost one of my officers. I had one assaulted one time and I took it extremely personally. Uh, so,
Yes, you do.
and you go to great extents when it's one of your own to prosecute and to make sure those people that have done that crime are prosecuted and upheld to the highest standard of the law because this shouldn't be happening.
Correct.
And and in that's in Julian's case too, just doing the right thing. Uh, yeah, whether it's, and we're going to talk about Julian. So let's start talking about Julian. When was your first interaction with Julian, Pam?
So, I have a daughter who just turned 28. So I'll just say when she was in middle school, she was going to the high school to practice softball with the high school team. She was in eighth grade, going to go into ninth grade the next year. And I pick her up and she gets in the car and she says, Julian Keene wants to be a game warden. And I said, who's Julian Keene? He plays on the football team. So that was about all I got. And I said, well, tell Julian, who I am. Find me, give him my phone number. I'll be glad to talk to him about, becoming a game warden. And roll around to the next fall, we're at a Friday night football game in our small town, and the guys are coming off the field at halftime to go to the locker room, and that's where you stand along the fence. And this big guy in full football uniform with a helmet on and dreads halfway down his back jumps out of line and shakes my hand and says, I'm Julian Keene. I want to be a game warden one day. And I said, well, why don't you go in there for halftime and come talk to me after the game? I'll wait around. So that was our first conversation about him being a game warden. And he had shared with me that he was going to get a chance to go play football at college. And I told him, I said, go play football at college and then come see me. I said, FWC will be here for you when you get out of college and come see me. And we exchanged numbers and he walked away. And I told him, I said, FWC is not going to like your dread. So you're probably going to have to get rid of them before you're really serious about this. And so we talked throughout his college times, and I was at a football game again a few years later, and somebody put their hand over my eyes, and I turn around and it was Julian. And first thing he said is, "I'm game warden ready." His head was shaved, and that was the start of him applying for FWC. And he applied 3 or 4 times. He had we had to school him up on some interview skills. He worked out like crazy. He could lift a house, but he didn't swim real well. So we swam with him a little bit, got him through the PT swimming part of it. Then we got him through the interview part, and it was 4 or 5 years, and then he got on full time and went to the academy, and I was lucky enough to have him come back and work for me in our town.
Well, what an awesome beginning story and just the initiative he took uh, to be a game warden. What gave him the idea to be a game warden, Pam? I mean, did he see something on TV? Had he had a relationship with one, or what gave him that inkling?
He was very close with one of his football coaches, who after high school, or after his senior year of football, he moved in with him. Patrick O'Bannon's his name. Julian called him dad. That's who I knew as dad to Julian, and his wife was Mona, and I knew her as mom. And Patrick is a hunter, a fisherman, has an airboat, and that's the life that Julian lived with him. And Julian loved the outdoors. Julian had an airboat. Julian had a big jacked up truck, and I mean, he just loved the outdoors, and he wanted to help people. He always, my son was one that's sports, and he would take kids to the high school, meet with them, and work out with any kid that wanted to work out with him. And he was always interested in their sports, interested in them. He would always tell them if they were making bad decisions, good decisions, what would happen to you if you made bad decisions. So he was always there to mentor kids. And he had shared with me football and people who cared about him in the community is what made him who he was. And he always wanted to give back.
Hmm, that's awesome. And it sounds like he was doing that in starting with your son or and other children,
Yes,
because your
yes.
son was pretty young as he kind of mentored him.
Yes, he was 8 when he started, and I could remember my son's name's Dallin, and he would say, "We're done practicing, meet me at the handy store." And I would meet him there, and he's in this truck that my son can't even, it comes up to his chin, and there's my little guy sitting in there with Julian in this big old truck. And every day my son would be like, "Can we go work out with Mr. Julian today?" And it wasn't just my son, there was high school kids, middle school kids. I mean, people just, he would just, as much time as they wanted, he would give to them. And my son played football for a while, but switched to soccer. Julian was a big football guy, and he would give him a hard time for playing soccer. But every weekend he played a tournament, he would call, "How did he do?" And he would talk to him, and "How are you going to do better?" So he was just always there for anybody who wanted him to be there for them.
Yeah, because a coach, whether it's football or soccer or any other thing, those coach ideology is the same. It would, no matter what you do and how to get your players to get better, even though it's a different game, it's the same ideology. Wouldn't you
Yes.
think? And
Yes. Oh, yes,
Julian,
for sure.
sounds like Julian had that and was trying to instill that in your son. That's the one thing I really like is about sports. There's some things I don't like about sports because it takes away from hunting and fishing. But
Yes, yeah. My son has went hunting and then showed up at soccer games, changing from camouflage to soccer uniforms many times.
yeah, it sounds like my son trying to get it all in. But I do like the team building. It talks, teaches you so much about team building, and those things that take pride to get better, to achieve, all of those good qualities. And you see that a lot of the children that play sports, students that play sports are achievers. And Julian is just one of those cases. And, somebody in the community must have took interest in him, like his football coach and, you just to say, "Hey, Julian, come talk to me if you want to be a game warden." That means a lot to inspiring game wardens because I had the same type of mentorship and to take some time out of your day and just talk to them and put them on the right path is just, is so important. And he was just taking what he had been given and giving it back.
Yes, he was. And there was many people in the town LaBelle that just took him in when he needed to be taken in. And, he would tell me, I mean, this is his words. He would say, I'd just sleep on somebody's couch till I thought that I wore my welcome out. And then I would go to this next football friend's house and stay there. So there's when you talk to people around our small town there's just, everybody knew him, and it wasn't just somebody who had came there and been there a year. He grew up there. People took care of him. People loved him, and it it was a group effort from a bunch of people helping raise Julian.
Yeah, so he has quite a story from interacting with everybody because he needed a couch to sleep on, to becoming a star football player in high school and then on to college, and then becoming a Florida Fish and Wildlife officer. Just a cool story in that short time.
Yes, yes, he was a real neat guy. Always had a big smile on his face and always gave you a big bear hug.
Mm. The incident that happened, I guess I'm going to ask, how long was Julian a Florida Fish and Game officer before the incident?
I believe it was 6 years.
6 years. So a seasoned officer. After five, I always call it a seasoned officer. Even, I remember always hearing 5 years is that point, and I think everybody almost agrees that I say that too. And 5 years rolls around, and they're like, "Am I seasoned now, LT?" And I'll be like,
Yeah,
"You tell me." So, yeah, I think I'm all set. So, but
right.
it's such a learning process to be a game warden that it takes that time. So when I hear, over 5 years, I think seasoned officer. So certainly Julian was seasoned and off duty when this incident occurred, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He had just got off duty.
Yeah. So off duty, he observes a pretty serious violation, correct, Pam?
Yes, we had been working earlier in the night. It was during COVID. Hendry County Sheriff's Office, the county we're in, they received several complaints from the landowners there that people were starting to kill cattle for the meat. So we had teamed up with them as a force multiplier, and we were out in the areas where the cattle ranches are, which for us, if they're going to kill cows, they were going to kill deer also or anything else. So it was
Hmm.
just basically we were looking for anything. And the week before, or a couple weeks before, I don't remember how long, we had caught a bunch doing it. So we were out again. We had all set up. I was further south in the county. He was in the middle of the county. And he called me and said it was probably about a quarter till 11, said he was headed in for the night. We had to be out on the boat the next day because our little county didn't shut the boat ramps down. So everybody from the coast was coming to our boat ramps using our area. So we were busier then than we were during our holiday weekend. So I told
Wow.
him I was going to stay out a couple extra hours and I'd catch him when I came out the next day and he could pick me up at the boat ramp. And that's when I was sitting with the sheriff's deputy, and that's when he got the call that an FWC officer had been shot in LaBelle. And initially, I looked over at my CAD screen, my computer screen that says who's working in what county. And I said, well, that's not possible. I'm the only FWC officer in Hendry County right now. So it took a few minutes for me to even realize what was happening. And what had happened is he had witnessed somebody run through a stop sign, run through a ditch, and he believed they had hit the house of the after they ran through the ditch. So he was, if I know Julian, he was just going to tell him, go back and tell them people you'll fix the house. And it, him and his friend, made contact with them, and the guy got out of the car, got in the car with his girlfriend, and they left the scene. But what Julian didn't know was that they looped around the block and came back, and that's when he shot him.
Hmm. So he came back to shoot Julian.
He did. We didn't know that at first, but after the sheriff's office and FDLE, our Florida Department of Law Enforcement, did their investigation, they did leave the scene and come back.
Hmm. So is there anything from the investigation, other than that? I mean, was Julian waiting for response from somebody, or I'm assuming there was damage or did-
I don't think Julian had called anybody yet. You could hear, Julian's friend had a dash cam video. You can hear the word police in there. I don't know if Julian was gonna call them,
Hmm.
but from what it looks like is, Julian's friend said all Julian told him was to run. And it looked like Julian was running in the other direction when either he came back or he saw the gun, and the guy shot, I believe, 5 times. One hit Julian, and I believe 2 or 3 went in Julian's friend's truck.
Jeez. So full-blown firefight after the fact, really. Came
Right.
back and more of an ambush.
Yes, and Julian did not have a firearm with him.
Hmm. No. So in the investigation ensued and they were arrested?
They yes, well, it was the shooter was arrested that night. They found 3 people in the car with him later that morning, but the other 2 were not with him at the time it happened. So the shooter was arrested that night on some charges. A little while later, the charges were upped because of more evidence came in.
I'm sure that dash cam played a lot into the investigation.
It did. You could hear a lot of stuff on it. You couldn't, see too much because it was, the vehicles were parked at that point.
Right, but some of the audio certainly helped.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
no, hearing the word police sometimes helps. I mean, sounds like
Yeah,
Julian was certainly identifying himself.
yes, I believe so. And his yeah, he did not have his firearm. His firearm was still in his vehicle away from the scene.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, very, very sad, very tragic. Through the interviews and anything, did the suspect ever say why?
Uh, I lost you for a minute.
Yep, we're back on, but yeah, I don't know what happened. Sometimes those satellites go down. But but through the investigation, was there ever a why? I think that's a question I think we all ask no matter what is why. And was there ever a why he did that?
I think initially what he said was self-defense, and I believe once it came out that he left the scene and came back, that was no longer viable. So, and I think that's when they upped the charges, if I remember correctly. But I mean, even the night we arrested him, they let us put Julian's handcuffs on him, and it didn't phase him at all. He
Hmm.
didn't seem phased at all by it.
Yeah, a long time criminal.
No, he was 19 years old.
Uh, yeah, that's horrible. Yeah, yeah. Some of the, I can think of some of the same type of people Julian wanted to help.
Yes. And that's just it. That's what everybody says. If he just would have stopped and talked to him, he would have told him, "Hey, go back and talk to them people tomorrow and let them know you'll fix whatever you damaged."
Yeah,
That would have been the end of it.
yeah. Nope. Very sad story on both sides. That's horrible.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but we do these podcasts, to remember all the good things about the officers. I mean, it's that same phrase. It's not the way they died, but it's the way they lived. And Julian certainly lived an incredible life up to this point. Even though he was so young when he was taken from us, he probably made quite the impact on his community before then. And I hate to say it, even after we talked about the scholarships that were in his name, and there's a mentoring program. So a lot of good is still coming from Julian Keene.
Yes. Yes. And there's a lot of t-shirts going around or bracelets, and it's hashtag be like Julian. So that's a big thing around our town, is be like Julian. And I mean, even people that didn't know Julian now. And there's not many that didn't know him, but even the people who have moved there since feel like they know who Julian is. A little, hometown restaurant there, Two Peas, has a pickle club, but it's not called a pickle club. It's called the Julian, because they would make it for him when he came in, and now it's on their menu. Then it's called the Julian.
Oh, no, those are incredible things. Um, how did, I mean, sure, you had the aftermath too. I mean, you were his supervisor, you were his friend, you were his mentor. Um, you know, it's such a loss to you. Can you talk about maybe dealing with the aftermath if you're comfortable with that, Pam?
Yeah, I made it on scene that night, and when I got there, they were still doing CPR. So as a supervisor, as a person, I mean, that you just, something I'll never, ever, ever forget, watching that happen. And then when the lead medic came up to me, we're in a small town. I've been there a long time. I did my whole career there. And he came up to me, and I mean, he's just crying his eyes out. And he's like, Pam, there's nothing else we could do. And I'm sorry. And, and I'm like, I know. I mean, I've watched y'all, and they had been doing it 30 minutes before I got there. So that was probably one of the toughest things I've ever had to see. And it's something I'll never unsee.
Mm,
But the support of that town and FWC and all other conservation agencies and law enforcement agencies was unbelievable. By the time I had got home, I had been out for almost 2 days by the time I finally made it home. And when I woke up the next morning, I don't know that I slept, but when I got out of bed the next morning, my yard was filled with people I knew and didn't know. Whether it was, some of them were officers I knew I'd worked with, some were people I just didn't know. And, my husband called his work and said, I need to take off an undetermined amount of time. I don't know how long I need to be off, but I know I need to be here for my wife. And he told me later, he says, I don't know really what I did to help you, but I know there was a lot of people here and you were going to be okay, that they were here to take care of you. And that's, I think, what people don't realize in the law enforcement community is there was a lot of help, whether I knew I needed it or not. And then there's just stuff you don't realize, like HR wanting the timesheet done. You
mm,
need to go in and do his timesheet so they can finish out all that. And that's stuff you're not prepared for. Nobody tells you, because now I got to go back to his house in his truck and get his computer and get his day book and his notes so I could figure all that out. So, and that's just stuff you never prepare yourself for, when I had to get back in his truck the next day.
mm,
And and when I get there, all his stuff's there like it was when I rode with him last. So that kind of stuff was very, very tough. Or getting his truck ready for the funeral. And I had to drive it to the service. And you don't prepare yourself for that. I don't know that you can, but
mm.
that kind of stuff, you don't forget.
Yeah, for sure. And some things that we don't think about either, like
Yeah.
going to that truck. Not that I was killed in the line of duty, but I was shot in the line of duty, and my German Shepherd chewed my cruiser's safety belt. And I asked my father, because my cruiser that had been shot up was at police standards and training, and my dad worked with right next door and had a relationship with them. And I asked him, like, "Hey, can you go pull the safety belt out of my cruiser?" And so I could replace the one that I had, so I don't have to report it to, as you know, the agency.
Yeah, that's
And
so
I never
funny.
even thought anything of it. And he's like, "That's the hardest thing I ever did, is go into that cruiser and pull that safety belt out to see your blood on the seat, and just that." And I just never thought of it, Pam. And those are the things that we don't think about, that I think as supervisors we think about now because they've affected us. But the next supervisor that comes, doesn't have that real-time experience with shooting incidents, that, they may not think of anything and have somebody very close to the officer that was shot in the line of duty or killed in the line of duty, and have them do those things. And then We should be asking, are you okay with that? Because, it does. It's, yeah, reflecting, is really tough in the beginning. It's certainly, as time goes on, it is certainly easier to reflect on those things and to get those things that are really personal and really close to those that you loved, basically.
Yes. Yeah. And going and getting his uniform
Mm,
to take. And, oh, the first thing I did is I went and asked if I could get his handcuffs out of his gun belt. And, and they're like, why do you want his handcuffs? Because they didn't realize. And I said, look, I just want to take him to the sheriff and let him put the handcuffs on the bad guy when they do arrest him. And then they're like, okay, we like the way you're thinking. But at first they thought they initially thought I'm trying to take Julian's stuff. So
right.
it took a few minutes, but then going back and having them have to go pick out one of the uniforms and I'm like, nope, I need the long sleeve, I need the brass, I need, his tie, I need his cowboy hat. So
Hmm.
all that kind of stuff. And that, like you said, that's just stuff you don't think about. I never prepared myself to have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is a mental prep for that. And experience, unfortunately, is what preps a lot of us. But, there's a lot of game wardens across the country that listen to the podcast. So that's maybe a kind of prepping in itself that they hear this and they think about that if they have an incident and, can say, hey, let's make sure you're okay with doing these things first because it hits you in the face really hard initially.
Yes.
Because you're gone through a critical incident as much as they have. Maybe definitely a different way, but it is a critical incident for everybody. The supervisor, the other officers that worked with him, and then it just spreads out over, Florida Fish and Wildlife, to the sheriffs that were close and the community. In some way, somehow, we all experience a critical incident due to these shootings. And, police officers, game wardens, it's all the same. It just tears my heart out every time I see it.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. So, because I know what those families are going through,
Yes.
and it's very tough, tough times. As our memorial podcast for incredible officers that make such an impact. And Julian was certainly exceptional in that, I could tell. Um,
Yes.
and still is. His memories being carried on. Certainly, like you said, you like to tell the story now. We
I
can't.
do. I love to tell his story just because, it's just such a good story. He's one of the ones that he chose the right path. And, it's just such a good story to tell. I mean, he would walk in my house like he owned it. There was no knocking on my door, and he would just walk in and he'd sit down, he'd get whatever food he wanted. He would go through the cabinet, get anything he wanted. And,
Mhm.
I would do anything to have him walk back through my door and just eat all my food.
Yeah, and he loved being a game warden, didn't he?
He did. And to tell a quick funny story, I had been on almost, 20 years when, between 15 and 20 when he got hired. And there was one day I was arresting like 5 people and he was out, but he wasn't there. And he comes sliding to that scene sideways and he gets out and I'm like, Julian, what's going on? He's like, you did not call me and tell me you were arresting anybody. And I said, I know, but I got it. We're good. And he says, as long as I'm here, you will call me every time and I'm coming to back you up. And I said, Julian, don't you remember I've done this for 15 plus years? He said, that was before me. I will be here every time. And that's just the way he was. That wasn't just with me. That was with any of our people on our crew. He wanted to be there to help and make sure that he was there. And he said that many times to me whenever I was doing something. You didn't call me. And I'm like, 'cause I got it. But he just always wanted to be there to back you up and to be a friend and to help.
Yeah. Well, what a legacy. What a story. Um, yeah. So, nope, just remembering Julian, and I'm gonna have to get one of those shirts too. Be like Julian.
Yes, I will make
So,
sure you get one.
yeah. No, that's very precious to continue to tell Julian's story. Um, so thank you so much, Pam, for sitting down and sharing this and sharing it with the Warden's Watch listeners and continuing Julian's memory.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. God bless.
Thanks.
So that was about 30 minutes.